Welcome to the Empowering Women Podcast. Together, we will hear from ambitious and inspiring career women as they share their stories of success and overcoming career challenges. And now, your host, Mel the Engineer.
Welcome to the Empowering Women Podcast. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really happy to be here, and I want to take a moment to give a huge thanks to all of you who have rated the podcast and left us a review. That small act, that few minutes of time, goes such a long way to helping us continue to produce and provide this free content. So if you haven't done it already, please take a moment and leave us a review and a rating wherever you download your podcasts. Thank you. We've got a wonderful discussion to share with you today. Our guest is Tish Berge. Tish earned a degree in engineering. Her early career, she worked for a chemical provider and then a consulting company. She shifted focus towards people management and earned an MBA. Today, Tish serves as the General Manager of Sweetwater Authority in California. The mission of Sweetwater Authority is to provide 190,000 customers with safe and reliable water. They achieve this through best available treatment and conveyance technologies, sound management practices, public participation, and a balanced approach to human and environmental needs. Let's take a listen to Tish's story. Tish Berge, thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to the Empowering Women Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be part of the podcast. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I would like to start with, could you just give us a snapshot of where do you currently live and what is your current role and associated responsibilities?
Okay, Mel, happy to. So right now I live in San Diego, California, and I work in Chula Vista, California. So that's both Southern California. I've lived here for a little over 20 years, and I'm General Manager of Sweetwater Authority. We're a water service provider in South Bay, in Chula Vista, and National City, and we provide water to approximately 190,000 people who live here.
Excellent. Okay, that gives us a good idea of size. Okay, let's go back now to your earlier career years. Tell us about the first degree you earned. How did you pick your major, and what were you hoping to do with your degree?
So the first degree I got was an engineering degree. I went to Harvey Mudd College to get that. And the reason I went towards engineering was multifold. First of all, my father is an engineer. My uncle's an engineer. And so I grew up with those professional role models in my life. And when I thought about what I wanted to do, I knew I was good at math. I knew I was interested in science. I knew that I liked to problem solve. My higher grades were in shop as compared to some of my lower grades, which were in home economics at the time. So it just felt natural to want to go into a field where I got to solve problems and got to utilize my natural talents in math and science. And so that was my first degree, and how I kind of ended up going in that direction.
What did the next steps look like for you when you came out of college?
So when I came immediately out of college, it was during a recession. It was back in the early 90s. And I did have a struggle. I originally wanted to go into a master's program in environmental engineering, and that just didn't pan out for me. So I was able to land a position with a chemicals company, and it was a chemical sales company where I operated a mobile laboratory. And so that was my first job out of the chute, and really was foundational in so many ways as far as what it taught me and how it shaped the the career that happened to me later, and sort of how I approach people, how I approach my career, how I approach business. So that was the first job out of the chute, so to speak.
Could you expound a bit more on that, maybe on struggles you encountered and also the things that you alluded to here that influenced your career path?
Sure. So when I took the position with the chemical sales company, I was one of extremely few women who were hired into that workforce and part of that workforce. So when I started out, I was in a very unique position. I operated a mobile laboratory. There were only two of us in the company, and so that was, at that point it was 50% women in that role. It was me and this other guy. Um, when I promoted into sales, it shifted dramatically, and I became one of two women in a sales force of about 200. So that created a significant number of challenges just because I didn't fit in anywhere at that time in my career. So I'd characterize that time as extremely challenging. It was very lonely. It was difficult for me because I didn't have anyone to look to. So, thinking back to my college experience, when I got my degree in engineering from Harvey Mudd College, back then it was less than 20% women. Now I'm happy to say that Harvey Mudd College is 50% women under the leadership of their president, Clave, who's done a fantastic job getting that gender diversity. So at that time, less than 20% women, no female professors at all. So when I got that first job, I didn't even know what to wear. I didn't know how to interview. I didn't know what to look like. I didn't know what a professional engineer who happened to be a woman looked like. And the same thing happened in my first job. So here I am, one of 200 in a position, and I just don't know what I'm supposed to look like. I have no one to aspire to, no one to role model behaviors, professional appearance, everything. It feels like stumbling around in the dark in that way. And that's part of why now where I'm at in my position, I feel this profound duty to make myself visible because it's something I didn't have early on in my career. Does that answer the question?
It does. You mentioned feeling lonely. Tell us a little bit more about that. I don't want to put words in your mouth. So what I want to get at is, was there no one who stepped up in any way to mentor you? But I don't want to phrase it that way, if that makes sense.
No, that's a fair question. So when I was working independently in the laboratory, my boss was my mentor, and Alan Skiff was his name, and he did work with me closely. I mean, as any manager could and should with his or her direct. But I do remember there were times where he would also work with me closely with regard to my gender. In that, he would worry. I did a lot of traveling, for example. He'd worry about my safety. I was out in roles where I was in refineries and exposed to a lot of, how do I say, old school thinking with regard to women. And so he would, when he felt comfortable and when he could, coach and talk about that in a very, very limited scope. I remember making him extremely uncomfortable when I mentioned it was just me and this one other guy. So I did find out the other guy happened to make significantly more than me. And I approached my boss on that. And he, of course, had to go to corporate and talk to HR. And they rectified the situation. But boy, was he uncomfortable. But that was his job. And he had to work through that problem. But I remember all these weird feelings around it because I'd made a problem for him. But had I really, or had the company made a problem for him by not paying me equitably with the other man in the organization? I just remember back to that instance. I hadn't remembered that one in a long time. But I guess when you're in an independent role like that, that's your only coach. When I was then in sales, and one of just a couple women, I remember the manager at that time telling me things like, "I treat everybody the same," in trying to address the fact that I happen to be female and the rest of his direct reports were male. And looking back, I know what he was trying to do, and I know what he was trying to say, and I know how he was trying to protect himself, but no two people are the same. And you, especially as a manager, cannot think that your employees are robots and they can be treated all the same. And that's regardless of their gender, it's regardless of their race. It's just every single person is unique and different and comes with a unique, different set of needs as your employee. So you were delusional to think that you can treat everybody the same.
I agree with you, and I think that's poignant. We had a guest named Shireen on a previous episode who talked about needing to recognize things like some of your employees are introverted, some of them are extroverted. Mm-hmm. That necessitates different treatment, among other personality differences. I'd like to go back to something you said a moment ago about your manager, supervisor being concerned about you going to these environments like refineries. Were any of his fears founded?
From a safety standpoint, just in general, yes. They're back then, and it's a dangerous environment in general. But as a woman, it became just a little bit of a different issue. So, for example, I remember one time talking to him about the loneliness. So it was a traveling position. I was spending 3/4 of the time on the road. You're staying in hotels. You're alone. So I remember once talking to him about the loneliness and kind of having trouble with it at one point in time. And he's like, "Oh, well, your predecessor used to just go to the bars every night, but I wouldn't recommend that for you." So I remember that instance where, I could see immediately him not wanting to recommend something that could put me in danger because of my gender. Here, don't coach a female employee to go out to bars in strange places that you've sent her to, mm-hmm. for example. One thing I'm not sure that he was fully cognizant of or not was just in general, the environment was nowadays we could call it a hostile environment, but I mean, I'd walk into control rooms and there were nude pictures on the wall. And, thank goodness that's not what it is nowadays, but that's what it was then. So here I am in my Nomex, which are these flame retardant overalls. So my Nomex suit, my hard hat, my steel-toed boots. I'm walking in because I want to talk to them about hooking my trailer up to their water source. And I'm standing next to a picture of a nude woman. And that is a very uncomfortable feeling. I'm so glad that doesn't happen. Maybe I'm naive. I don't see that happening now. But I remember just feeling at that point kind of unsafe in a weird way just then. And you're in a workplace, you're surrounded by people, but immediately you start wondering, do they see me like that? Are they comparing me? Am I just a sexual object to them? And those issues. So as far as safe, I guess those are just maybe some of the issues.
Right. And I just want to acknowledge that I recognize some of these things are really difficult to talk about. So thank you for your willingness and being transparent, because this is difficult.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. These are memories I haven't unearthed in a while, so it's been a long time.
episode of the Empowering Women podcast is being released in August of 2019. So if you're listening shortly after it has come out, you've still got time to join us for the Empowering Women in Industry conference in Chicago this September. Head on over to empoweringwomeninindustry.com for details about registering and the lineup of speakers, everything you'll learn. I'll be there and I would love to see you and meet you. So join us and let's learn together. So again, that URL is empoweringwomeninindustry.com. Hope to see you there. All right. Well, take us through the next steps. You made a transition at some point. Did you decide to leave this company and go straight for an MBA, or was there something else that happened in your trajectory?
So I left chemical sales and I went into environmental consulting. So I did eventually get into the environmental field and in the private sector, and I was doing consulting work. And so around mid-career, about 10 years into it, while working on these projects, I became a project manager. I started to find that instead of working on the spreadsheets where I was doing air emission calculations or calculating the health risk associated with a source of air pollution or working on those types of projects, I found I was gravitating more towards the people management side and calculating the dollars on my projects. So estimating projects, seeing if I'm coming in on budget, preparing invoices, and motivating people, working with people to get deliverables done. So I kept focusing more and more on those types and those areas within my work and less on the technical side, both because of interest, partially because of, and because of talent, and that's where the supervisors were pushing me. So at that point, I realized I needed to make a shift in my career, that if that's where I wanted to work, it was time to go back to school. It was time to learn those things, that aspect of the business from a theoretical standpoint, not just on the job. And so I put myself back through school and got my MBA, and that launched me into my first director level executive position. And I've been there ever since.
Wow. Okay. So would you say that there was a big shift in focus at that point? So you went from perhaps more technical focus to maybe financial focus?
Yes, absolutely. That degree allowed me to make significant shifts in my career that ultimately made it possible for me to be in the position I'm at now as a general manager over 100 employees. And that was, the first one was to get into a higher level of management. So instead of being a direct frontline supervisor, I was able to become a director position. So it was managing supervisors who manage other people. So that MBA made that possible for me. And then later on in my career, I made the shift and became a director of administration and finance. And that would not have been possible, or I think it would have been much, much more difficult if I had not had my master's in business. And so that career shift helped me there too. Part of the reason I think I'm successful and comfortable and enjoy the general management side of my business and what I do in my career is that I've been exposed to many different areas of operations, both from the technical areas to financial to human resources. And being able to have that dual background, the technical undergraduate degree in engineering and then the business degree, advanced degree, made me a versatile candidate, able to go around and get those different types of experiences.
I think that's a great observation. So before we go and talk about the consulting piece a bit more, I'd just like to stop there and ask, for other women who are looking to advance in their career, how would you recommend they think about strategically getting that variety of experience so that they can have that versatility that you just described?
Sure. So that versatility mattered to me because I wanted to be a general manager someday. I knew when I went back to get my master's in business, I knew that's what I wanted to be. So I would encourage women as they're looking at their careers and mapping out what that looks like to, as Covey would say, begin with the end in mind. So, what is your real goal? Because my pathway would not work if, for example, somebody wanted to be a technical advisor or a technical specialist in a consulting firm working specifically on advanced water treatment, for example. That, in fact, when I got my MBA, I was working in a technical firm. They're no longer independent anymore. It was SAIC. And my manager at the time was a PhD in biology or chemistry. Anyway, he was in control of the purse strings. And so he was in control of whether or not I got access to continuing education dollars from the company. And he told me no, because I wasn't getting a real degree. So in his mind, to advance in his organization, I should have been getting a master's either in science or going on to get a PhD. So it really depends on where you want to go. And so the pathway is simply in support of that, the career goal. Not everybody wants to be a manager, for example. And if they do want to be a manager, they may not want to be a general manager where they're dealing with a lot of issues but not very deep. Some folks might want to be technical specialists. Some folks might want to be experts in their industry in a certain area. And so I would say to understand that first. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. That makes sense. And you're right. Not everyone wants to be managers, and many, I would say, in the technical field who are probably shouldn't be. So I think it is worth evaluating, what you want and where your strengths are to map that out. That I think you described that in a really excellent way. Thank you. When you were in consulting for those 10 years leading up to your MBA, did you encounter any struggles as a woman in that space that you could describe?
Yes, I did. So, I talked a little bit about sort of the shift to focusing on the people side and the dollar side. One thing I found, and as I look back, sometimes I parse out and I get confused, whether it was because I was a strong communicator or whether it was because I'm a woman. So I think before I tell this story, I think sometimes the challenge is I don't know anything other than who I've been and what I am. And so when people interact with me, it's very difficult for me to know, is that something just about me or is that gender based? So with that caveat, what I found when I was working in consulting was that the really technical work, the stuff where you're really digging in a spreadsheet and you don't talk to people all day long, would get delegated to the men in the group who didn't have good communication skills. But when it came to making cold calls, writing proposals, scoping projects, estimating how much time it would take each person to do it, those things were being delegated to me. And in the beginning, I fought back a little bit because in consulting, it's very dangerous not to be billable. You're very at risk for losing your job at a downturn if you're not the one creating the billable work that creates the revenue that comes into the firm. Now, you have to do the sales first before that work becomes billable or that billable work is realized, but that sales is going to be one of the first areas that may get cut in the downturn. So I was scared. I felt it was a risky place to be. And I remember confronting my manager at the time on that and saying, I'm not comfortable being only 50% billable. You're putting me on all the sales jobs. Yet, all the men in the group are doing the technical work. And he tried to explain, that's because that's your talent. And I'm trying to use people where they're good. And those guys can't do what I'm asking you to do. So please go do it. So when I look back, I think it was probably a mix of those items, a mix maybe of gender identification of kind of who's good at what, who does what. Because I can rock a spreadsheet. I tell you, I can, and I could have done the work that they were doing, but I took him at his word that that's where I was needed, and it served me well ultimately in the end.
At what point in your career did you have children, and how did you decide to manage your sort of personal and career choices?
Great question. So I'm going to preface it with talking about a financial term. So in finance, there's a term called the big bath. And the big bath is when you take all your losses in one year. So maybe you extend your losses to the next fiscal year or realize them early so that they all happen at once. So what I did was when I went back to school to get my MBA, I chose that time to have my family and to have my two beautiful children. And so it was very tricky because I remember when I told my boss I was pregnant, it was after I had gotten into MBA school. He didn't have children, and I remember when I came and told him that I was pregnant, the first words out of his mouth that he blurted out was it planned? Because I guess I'd done such a good job making my boss think I was like him that he didn't think that I wanted to have a family. So those words blurred out of his mouth, and then he recovers from that. So it worked out really quite well. I did my MBA. I had my two children at the same time. The first one, I had my daughter the very first semester of business school. And I planned my son a little bit better. I had him during a summer break, but it was really quite challenging. So we didn't have all the wonderful rules and laws nowadays to protect mothers. So I remember using the breast pump in the bathroom because there was no place that I could go to pump breast milk that I wouldn't get walked in on. So I remember doing that in between breaks during business school. And I remember also one of my reviews, my personnel reviews, performance review, my boss wrote about my quote, extended leave, because I took the 8 weeks that was allowed for my maternity leave, and then I took a little bit of FMLA. I think I took 2 weeks. And that showed up in my review, my extended, and I'm using air quotes, extended leave. I was able to get that removed from my performance review, but it was a very frustrating experience. It's funny, I was telling one of the men who reports to me the story about how I used my MBA as a way to hide my maternity leave. So I went part-time during that time in my life. And if I ever got asked about a gap, or I got asked about, they checked references or knew that I was part-time, I could always say, oh, I was going to business school. I was getting my advanced degree. And it's funny because I felt like I needed to be able to have a way to keep my kids secret. I didn't ever want it to influence potential job opportunities moving forward. But I love having kids. I'm very blessed. I have a husband who stays home, works from home, which has allowed me to be more focused on my career than I think I could have been otherwise without that security. But I tell women and men now that childcare is the hardest part of parenting in the beginning years. I mean, of course, there's being tired, and there's the unknown and changing dynamics in your marriage and all those other things. But childcare, managing how you're going to do that while being a professional, I think was the hardest part.
And I presume your children are both healthy, so that's also with this sort of understanding that your kids are both healthy, but they still require a lot of attention.
Indeed. Indeed, as they all do, and mine are extremely resilient. My kids are very resilient, so I'm very fortunate that way.
Do you have any thoughts or perhaps advice for women regarding your partner? So you obviously selected a partner who is supportive of your career goals. Was that something that you had in mind as you were dating? Was that something that was a priority to you?
Well, that's a great question. So I'm a strong personality. I'm extremely driven, and I did know I needed somebody who was going to be okay with that. So I married a coworker. We met back in consulting, and the rest is history, I guess you could say. So he saw that side of me and knew that side of me. So it was never anything that had to be explained or talked about or revealed or anything, because that's how he knew me. He knew me actually as a coworker before anything else. But it's funny. So thinking back to consulting and the boss who sometimes didn't have good judgment, I remember being in a situation. I was the only woman on the team, and I was with my future husband, one other coworker, and the boss. And I was being my normal self. I'm direct, I'm outspoken, and I don't know what I was being direct and outspoken about, but I was doing that. And my boss said to one of my male coworkers, he goes, "Gosh, she's never going to find anyone who's going to marry her." And and yeah, so first of all, wow. Second of all, I showed them. I married the other guy who was there, and 21 years later, everything's fine. But yeah, it's funny how sometimes, I guess, so that encapsulates how some people might believe that you can't be feminine and strong. And I think you can. I think it does take a unique person to have their confidence to be able to handle it. I have a theory. Many female engineers I know end up marrying engineers, and I did the same. And I think some of it might be also just that they may, how do I put it? Maybe there's some kind of affinity there that helps make that aspect of the strength in the woman more manageable for the partner. I'm stumbling on this one a little bit, but long story short, yes, I thought about it. I got super lucky, married a wonderful coworker who's now a wonderful life partner and a great dad.
You're listening to the Empowering Women podcast. I'm your host, Mel the Engineer, and I want to thank you for sharing time with us today. Making quality content that can help you and other professional women achieve your career ambition is at the heart of why we do what we do. We would love to hear from you. You can get in touch with us by visiting empoweringwomenpodcast.com, or you can find us on social media. I'm out there as Mel the Engineer, and then the Empowering Women in Industry organization is active on most social media channels as well. Thanks again for listening. Looking back on your career, is there anything that you wish you had done differently?
Ooh. Well, I've made a lot of mistakes, so I'll start with that. But what do I wish I had done differently? I wish I could have accelerated getting to know myself. And I don't know. So I'm trying to imagine one of your listeners thinking, "Oh, great. What does that look like? How do I accelerate getting to know myself?" That's not very useful advice. But I remember trying on a lot of different personas. Um, and maybe it's because I didn't feel like I had role models. I'm not sure, but I would try them on and then they wouldn't work. So, for example, back when I was in technical sales, I used to try to be a guy. I don't know how else to say it. I used to try to tell jokes like a guy. I used to try to hang out with the guys. I would do shots with the men when we were at training, and that wasn't good in a variety of ways. So I wish I could have found a way to get to know myself earlier better and feel more comfortable in my skin instead of bumping around so much as far as what works for me, what doesn't work for me, what resonates, what gets me the results that I need. But I don't know how to translate that to advice for someone who's might be in her 20s listening to this.
Was there anything that happened that helped you in that process, or was it really just this sort of trial and error almost?
Well, a lot of it's trial and error. When I finally did start getting some role models, women who would talk to me, that helped a lot. It really did, and that kind of goes back to why I feel this responsibility to try to be that for others, because I did get some pointers. I guess what would help here's what I think would have helped. I think it would have helped if I had had more people to ask, and I had felt more comfortable asking people, how am I seen? What do other people see me as? What am I doing that is working well, and what am I doing that's not? And getting that external feedback and asking for it. I think if I could transport back in time, that would be the difference. I would ask earlier in my career for that kind of feedback about how I'm being seen by my peers, how I'm being seen by the customer, how I'm being seen by folks who could be sponsors in the future who might want to hire me or help promote me or help make things happen. Give me that feedback. That's what I would change.
You have described some of the struggles that you encountered early on when there were really no role models around you, certainly not in the upper ranks. And we know that even today, based on some research like that the Society of Women Engineers has done, there's attrition of women in the engineering workforce. So there's approximately 20% of engineering school graduates are women, but we only make up about 11% of practicing engineers. So there's an exit that happens.
Yeah.
Even though workplace culture has improved some, and there are now some protections in place for mothers, I wonder if you have any other thoughts on that for our women listeners, whether it's an observation or advice as other women are coming along in engineering or other male-dominated spaces.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great question, Mel. And I was at a talk recently where I did some research on the numbers of women in engineering and found what you just quoted. And what shocked me was, in almost 30 years, it really hasn't moved much as far as the number of women that are graduating in engineering fields and what we make up in the workforce. And I feel a certain amount of guilt. As I look on the wall and I look at my professional engineering degree in chemical engineering that I don't use, I feel like I'm one of them. When I think about my trek to my current position, I'm not sure I could have gotten here staying in engineering. And that, I hesitate to share it because I don't want to scare people away. For instance, my daughter's in civil engineering program in college, and I'm thrilled. I am absolutely thrilled for her. And when I look at her, I know she's going to have the loneliness I did. I know that things haven't changed as much as I would have hoped, and that she's going to encounter the loneliness and some of the other challenges associated with not having a lot of people who look like her around her. So I guess I would just encourage and just brace for it. Imagine I live in San Diego. Imagine you're in the ocean. Just know the waves are going to come and brace for them. And if you brace, they're going to roll over you and it's going to be fine. If you don't know they're coming, or if you turn your back on them and try to pretend they're not there, they might knock you down. But I think there's a lot of fantastic opportunity. I think that attitudes are shifting, not as fast as I know many of us would hope. But I think I think once there's a critical mass, there's going to be a tipping point. And to continue to remember the reasons why we originally became engineers, and that's problem solving, right? We like to solve problems. We tend to like to better the world. We like to fix things, make things better than when we found them. And so if you can hold on to that core, like, this is why I'm here, this is what I'm doing it, find something I love at work, find people who support me, ask for, get feedback, and brace for the waves because they will come. I would say maybe that would help.
Let's transition now to the present and your current role. Mm-hmm. Tell us about what you enjoy most and what's most rewarding about your current role.
Well, I absolutely love public service, first of all. And I love being in charge of a group who's able to make sure that people receive something on a daily basis that they need without even thinking about it. I know we get taken for granted in the public service sector. We provide an essential public service. And when people take us for granted, that means we're doing our job well, right? It means that every single time they go to the tap, water is there, that it's clean, that it's safe, that it's reliable. And I love that connection with the community because I can't tell you how many companies are out there desperate to tell their employees how they make a difference. And it is so easy for me because I can just point to this beautiful, vibrant community and tell folks it wouldn't be here if they didn't have water. It wouldn't be here if they didn't have drinking water. People use our product every single day. People need our product. They're going to need it tomorrow. And so it's just such a beautiful place to be in that way, to feel and to know that what you do is creating a vibrant community. It's life-giving, and that it matters. So that's really what I like about the industry, and I like is about working in water.
Tish, this has been a really great discussion, and I'd just like to open it up now for some open-ended recommendations that you might have or advice that you might have for other ambitious women who are listening.
So I'm going to tell a story to get to the crux of this advice, but the advice is just to please remember that everything we do in business, everything we do in our career, it's all about people. And those relationships that you create one-on-one with people are going to be what carries the day for you. And the world is a very small place, especially technical industries are very small places. And you never know when you're going to run into people again. And they will crop up throughout your career, and it can be fantastic if you forge those really positive relationships along the way. So in my very first job, so I learned this lesson early in my career, and then I've just seen it repeated over and over and over again. And it was back when I was in technical sales. I was up in Canada, and we were going after a multi-million-dollar, multi-year project or contract to sell chemicals to a refinery. And it was my firm against another firm. And I either showed up early or I was there late or something around when the interviews were. And it's a small town. There was one hotel. So it's dinner time. I come down and I go to the one restaurant in the one hotel in town. And the competitor is there with the client. And there's about 8 people at the table. So they're having that fancy client dinner that that salespeople do. 8 people, bottles of wine, they're all laughing. And I kind of freeze because I've been seen at that point. I'm by the hostess station and I've been seen. And so the head of the competitor gets up from the table and he comes over to me and he invites me to join them. And this was a huge project that we were going after. We were in the competition stage. They were obviously having what looked like a very successful client dinner, but he invited me to the table knowing that I'm from out of town. There's only one hotel. This is the one restaurant. And so I joined them for dinner. And he told me, as I was kind of looking at him bewildered, like, oh my gosh, is this okay? Is this the right thing to do? I don't know. And he said, you know what? It's all about people. Business is just all about people. Come join us. And so that lesson has been repeated over and over and over again. It's we are so dependent on the people that we get to work with in life. It doesn't matter how technically brilliant we are. It doesn't matter what we may have created, what patent we might have, what job we may have just landed in the consulting firm. We depend on other people, and those relationships are the lifeblood of business. They're the lifeblood of our career. So I would just encourage women early in their career to look at, how am I managing the relationships in my life? How am I managing the relationship with my boss? How am I managing the relationship with my peers? How am I managing the relationships with my clients, with the peers outside of my organization? Because those are all things to be managed. And it's not, yes, they can happen organically. And people who do it well, they make it look like it just happens. But I assure you, it's managed. You track follow-ups. You pay attention when they tell you how many kids they have and what their ages are. You pay attention to what's going on in their life, and you make notes so that next time you see them, you can ask about it. You show an interest in them. You invite them out to coffee. You invite them out to lunch. You send them a note thanking them if they did something nice for you. All of those things, because at the end of the day, that behavior is what makes or breaks a career.
That was heavy and also really good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tish, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom with us. It's been a real pleasure today.
It was great to spend time with you, Mel. I've been listening to your podcast. I'm very much enjoying your point of view. I love the service that you're providing to the women out there in industry, looking at what their career shape should be, what that looks like. And I really am grateful to have been a small part of helping you in that journey.
Oh, thank you. All right, that's it for episode 12. Again, we are so grateful you joined us today. I've got a few important announcements. First, we are coming to the end of season 1. That's right, season 1 is wrapping up. We originally planned to end at 12 episodes, but we have a few things in our goodie bags that we want to share with you. So there's at least one more fun thing we'll push out in the coming weeks leading up to the Empowering Women in Industry conference. Maybe more, who knows? Stay tuned for that. Then the Empowering Women in Industry conference is coming up fast. If you're listening to this episode near its release date, you've got about a month to register and prepare for the conference happening September 26th in the heart of downtown Chicago. I cannot wait to hear from the speaker lineup. I promise that if you decide to join us, you'll walk away with some excellent new relationships in your network and new tools in your tool belt to help you take the next steps in your professional and career ambition. Find details and register at empoweringwomeninindustry.com. Next, if you have thoughts on what you'd like to hear in the coming episodes, and certainly for season 2, we would love to hear from you. Do you have a topic you'd like covered, or perhaps a guest you think would be good? Let us know. reach out via empoweringwomenpodcast.com. You can also reach me directly at Mel the Engineer on Twitter, Facebook, or meltheengineer@gmail.com. Finally, last but not least, please take a moment to hit the review button wherever you download your podcasts. The 5-star ratings are super appreciated, but it helps even more if, for instance, with Apple's ranking system, if you give us a review where folks actually take the time to write something out about the show, why you liked it, how it's helped you, etc. Thank you so much for doing this. We understand that your time is valuable. All right, until next time, keep rocking out there, and I can't wait to see you at the conference. Bye, ladies.
Thank you for joining us for an episode of the Empowering Women Podcast with Mel the Engineer. If you find the Empowering Women Podcast helpful, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts. Our show is a partnership between Mel the Engineer and the Empowering Women in Industry organization. Learn more by visiting empoweringwomenpodcast.com.